Human factors engineering is a field that works with people that the work will affect. Human factors research uses methods from various disciplines such as psychology, sociology, engineering, visual design, and user design to study human behavior and its abilities with the goal to design systems that help people. This research can have direct impact on improving human error, increasing productivity, and enhancing safety, system availability, and comfort. How can human factors engineering be integrated into patient-oriented research? This is episode 15 of Pep Talks, the Patient Engagement Podcast. In this episode, recorded in the summer of 2020, we speak with Dr. Holly Witteman, professor in the Department of Family and Emergency Medicine at Université Laval, to learn more about her research in achieving human-centeredness in health-related domains, including a focus on how best to adapt digital health technology to people rather than expecting people to adapt to technology. Paul Ferry first asked Holly about what human factors engineering is.
So human factors, the way I often describe it to people is that it is the study of the interactions between humans and technologies. And technologies can be construed in a very broad way, and it includes things like systems. And there are different branches of human factors. So some people in human factors engineering will study physical interactions between humans and technologies, so ergonomics. And some people will study cognitive interactions. And that's the side that I'm more on the cognitive side, and in specifically looking at human-computer interaction.
Okay. So how would you say that background has informed your work and thinking about health?
Research study about it. We just took this work that we've done and adapted it as more of a knowledge translation kind of thing. But basically, people get to build their own avatar, and then 8 other avatars for the people around them. And then we have a narrated animation that sort of walks through, well, this is how a virus, an infectious disease can spread through your community when there's contact between people on a regular basis, and here's what happens if you reduce that contact. So you get a very personalized visualization of what this means. And the reason we did that was because there are other visualizations out there, but they tend to use pretty abstract icons and abstract formats. And when we've tested those kinds of things in our human-computer interaction lab, what we've found is that people don't necessarily map abstract icons. That's my dog. Hi, sweetheart. What we found in our lab when we've tested these things is that people don't necessarily map abstract icons to humans, to people.
Okay.
So by having people build their avatars, what we're hoping to do, and we haven't tested this yet, but certainly I shouldn't say I haven't tested it. We haven't trialed it yet, but we have tested it in the lab.
Sure.
And what we think that is happening is that it's what we think that's happening is that people are more emotionally connected to those icons because they are avatars representing people they know.
Yeah, no, I actually saw this a couple weeks ago. I think you tweeted it.
Yeah, I've been tweeting about it quite emphatically because I have no other way to disseminate it. I mean, we put it on Facebook too. I had to learn about Facebook, and I'm thinking about learning about TikTok.
Yeah.
But mostly this is just, me and my team going, okay, let's get this out to the world now.
Yeah. How are your dancing skills for TikTok?
Very bad.
Yeah, no, we talk about it with our team as well, and I'm thinking, no one knows how to dance, so I think we're not gonna do it. What was I gonna say?
He can dance, but he won't do it on video.
Oh, yeah, no, the worst. Yeah. So when I used the tool a couple weeks ago, I did find it like, as much as I was gonna physically distance or socially distance, anyways. It was like a different kind of emotional experience using it.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah.
I would love to know more, actually.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. We don't have to do that now.
Well, just like I was picking the people. I was like, oh yeah, I know this person, and then it was just like, oh, and then I thought about what it would mean if they got sick, and it was my fault, and it was largely as a person driven by like guilt in any ways. It's I was like, oh no.
That's amazing though. That's really cool to know, because that's what we're going for. I mean, we don't want people to feel guilty, but we do want, it's one of those, humans are, for the most part, we are very pro-social. Humans care. We care about the people around us, and most people care about the people around them. I mean, I think there's a lot of press given to a very small minority of people who are less caring, but the vast majority of people are very caring, and all you need is the vast majority of people to do the right thing.
Yeah, no, I found myself really, really like loving in a certain kind of way, like loving everybody. I'm like, oh, I love it what you're doing, and like I'm just, I don't know, I'm slightly overwhelmed by positive emotions for everybody. But
that's awesome. I love that though. That's really cool.
But so what about any of the work that you've done? Have you either involved with patient partners or done any work about understanding their role in health research?
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually sort of assumed this is why you invited me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, we have a transitional period of chat.
Okay. All right. Yes. So I have, because human factors is very much about designing for the way people are rather than the way we wish they were. Or the other thing that I often say is that it's about adapting designs to people, adapting systems. It's about adapting systems to people rather than expecting people to adapt to systems. And so you can only do that if you involve people. Right? So right from this is the field, there are a bunch of intersecting fields and they sometimes have different names. But I would say, I feel pretty confident saying that human factors engineering is one of the fields that really has always worked with the people who are ultimately going to use the thing that it is that you are researching or developing. So I have always done my research like this, and I have continued to do my research like this, and I held funding from the patient-centered PCORI, patient-centered. I'm terrible with acronyms, so I decided to work in medicine and in French. Patient-centered Outcomes Research Institute.
Yes, there.
So I held funding from them. I was the first person outside the United States who got funding as a principal investigator. I've since held another award with them. I'm very involved in the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research Chronic Disease Network about diabetes. I personally have type 1 diabetes, and I think that's partly why I've always really taken to this idea of involving people, because I have lived that as a person with a chronic disease. When I see research done relevant to my health, and I think, wow, that was a silly idea. Why didn't they talk to someone?
Yeah. So any examples of like a project that how have you involved patient partners?
Oh, so basically the way that I approach this, and I published about this a little bit, I think I have a paper in the Journal of General Internal Medicine, 12 lessons learned, in which we really just sort of distilled. It was the whole team on that project funded by PCORI, and we distilled a lot of the things that we've collectively learned, and that really summarizes the way I approach this. But basically, my perspective is that patient partners have a particular kind of expertise, and they are members of the team, and that's the expertise that they're bringing. And they may also have other kinds of expertise, just like everyone else on the team. So, you involve people with different clinical expertise, people with particular research expertise, people with particular language expertise, and it's just one of the different forms of expertise that people bring. So my approach to this kind of work has always been that patient partners are members of the team, and they get treated like everyone else. Because it's often not their professional role, then you have to organize something with respect to compensation and remuneration and reimbursement and all that sort of stuff. But aside from that, it's no different from involving anyone else.
Yes. So we've talked to on the podcast a few different people with sort of generically social sciencey backgrounds, so sociology, people from social work, and so on. Do you think this sort of the patient engagement mindset, or the patient engagement movement, whatever you want to call it, can learn anything from some of the work already done in the social sciences?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, participatory action research has been around for decades. Community-based research has been around for decades. So I hope, and I mean, many of us who do patient engagement research, I hate that term, we do work with people and involve people who have that kind of expertise, because I think really what it's about is about, like I said, recognizing recognizing the diverse expertise that people bring to the table and making space for that, and respecting everyone's contributions.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a new change of topic now.
Yeah.
What was hashtag End the CCV about?
Oh gosh. So End the CCV was the culmination of a lot of discussions with people who have been involved in research in different ways, and combined with my own professional expertise in making systems easy to use for people, for humans. Mm-hmm. And it was I think, finally got to the end of our patience with waiting for this system to improve. And the main problem that I see is that it consumes so much time. And because it consumes so much time, it consumes a lot of resources that could be better allocated to actually doing research, actually solving problems.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the sort of the campaign.
So the campaign was an open letter that we developed we developed it openly. We invited anyone who wanted to contribute to the open letter, and we took a lot of suggestions in and drafted the letter. And then we opened it to signatures, and we got, some 2,600 something signatures, I think. I'd have to look it up to be sure. Somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 signatures. Sure, yeah. And in the letter, we asked the three main federal research funding agencies in Canada to stop using the Canadian Commons CV and adopt one of three alternatives that we proposed, either a simple page-limited open format CV, mm-hmm. or a page-limited semi-structured CV, or either of those two combined with an ORCID.
Oh yeah.
For people who wanted a little more details.
Mm-hmm. So the reason I was asking about the CCV as well was it came to our attention at the patient engagement platform that, well, I mean, we know this anyways, but like your campaign came to our attention because we do get a lot of, I'll be kind and say, complaints from some of the patient partners, especially that we work with, or other people with lived experience who are involved in our projects, that the CCV is really quite burdensome.
It's atrocious.
Yeah. So did you get any feedback from these kind of like the patient and community researchers about your campaign?
Yes. Well, and we deliberately, I reached out to people I knew and invited them to sign the letter if they wanted to, and made sure, and we actually had text in there because this is a problem, and we know this is a problem. I know researchers who've had community member partners on their grants, or patient partners on their grants, pull out because the Canadian Commons CV was such a barrier for them, and it made them feel bad about themselves because it's designed for a particular kind. It's not even designed for all academics. It is designed for a very specific, narrow model of academic. So it's not even inclusive within academia, and let alone bringing in other kinds of expertise and other kinds of other reasons that people might be involved in research. So it's appallingly bad. I mean, what we do in our team is we create the Canadian Commons CV for partners. And then there's a lot of, emails back and forth, reviewing it, making sure that everything that we've put in is accurate. But it's just awful. It's awful. And it's a huge barrier to doing research the way we want research to be done.
Yeah, no, we've had to do that on our team as well, where, I mean, you talked about how much time it consumes just for yourself filling it in, but now whenever we have an application for something, we have to fill it in for 2 or 3 additional people. And like, I don't mind doing it in terms of we're forced to by the system, but like, would I rather to not do it at all? Yeah, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, well, and I think it's just, no one likes it. It doesn't serve any purpose. There's no benefit to it. It doesn't serve researchers. It does not serve reviewers. It doesn't even serve the agencies. They have to spend, they devote so much time and energy to propping up that system. And it's just horrible. I hate it so much.
Yeah, I mean, I've never met anyone who thinks, "Oh, I'm a big CCV fan."
So when we did the letter, we did have a very small number of people who wanted to keep it, or who wanted, and then there were some other people who had ideas about how the structured CV data could be used, but they didn't seem to understand the inherent limitations of that kind of data. So they had these ideas of, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could do these kinds of analyses? But they weren't aware of, or didn't seem to be aware of the inherent limitations of data that you only collect at the time of applying for grants, and what that means for the survival bias that's baked into your database, and all the inaccuracies that are going to be in that data set.
Yeah, no, I mean, as much as it might be a flawed CV tool, it's not a data collection tool, really.
No, it's a terrible data collection tool. I mean, when you look at the kinds of bibliometric analyses, which is one of the things that people do really want to do, and I think that's great. I fully support doing those analyses. It's just that the CCV database is not the best way to do that. And there are other databases that are much more robust that already exist. And basically all you need to do is some linkages.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's definitely possible to do, I think, other ways.
Well, and people do. I mean, there've been these huge analyses done with, for example, with NIH, the National Institutes of Health funding, and their CV is not a structured database in any way. I mean, it's a five-page biosketch that you can edit in Word. It takes about 10 minutes to update. So it's a totally different kind of model, and they are able to make that work. So I find it very difficult to believe that we in Canada have to create this specialized database to collect these data, when much larger analyses than anything we will ever do have been done using existing databases.
So one thing I always like to ask people on the podcast is for advice. So if you were asked to give advice to researchers who were thinking of working with patients and community members on their research projects, what would it be?
The one piece of advice that I always try to remember for myself, and that I think is important, is that this is about human interaction and human relationships. And so one of the things that is really important is maintaining those human relationships. And especially if people haven't done that kind of research before, if they've only ever really worked with other people whose professional job it is to work in research, there are certain norms that are sort of, it's tacit knowledge within academia. And when you involve people who haven't been involved in academic research before, those tacit norms may not be present. And so you have to take the time to adhere to more normal norms,
Yeah.
like regular social norms.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think one of the things that we often hear, and I think it's totally fair, is that you never hear back from researchers. Like you write this letter for the grant and then you never hear back from them. And I don't think it's actually necessarily true that you never hear back from them. I know that happens. But mostly what happens is it takes a really long time before you ever hear anything. And if you haven't been really upfront with people about here's the timeline, here's what we're expecting, and then also when people have been involved, some of the products that come, papers, that sort of thing, results, that can also take a long time. And so making sure that you get those back to people, that you're feeding things back to people, that you're continuing to keep them involved, that relationship management is time consuming. It's hard work. I think it's also very rewarding work, because you get to work with amazing people.
No, it's interesting. I just talked to somebody from the CanSolve Kidney Network. And she was saying quite similar things around when they did a sort of evaluation of their projects. One of the things that the patient and community members said was they wouldn't hear from the researchers. And they went back to the researchers and they said, well, how come you didn't update them on anything? They said, well, there was nothing to update them on. Yeah. So now they've built into their process sort of these annual or even more regular kind of check-in points where everybody just gets together. And even if the researchers say we put in the application, we still haven't heard, the sort of the public members really just prefer to know that nothing is for news, like there's no news.
Yeah. Yep.
But
no, I think if you're not involved in research, the whole process, it's very weird.
Oh yes, yeah.
Like it's a very weird world, right? And there's that's what I mean when I say there's a lot of tacit knowledge, and I remember personally learning all these things because I'm the only academic in my family. I had no idea. I had no plans to go to grad school. So, everything that I have learned as a researcher, I have learned through doing. And, all of these norms are weird.
Yeah, I think my dad hasn't figured out what I do yet still.
Yeah. No, I've had some really interesting conversations with my family members who think, for example, I remember when I got my first big grant and they thought it was awarded personally to me. But I got a whole bunch of money. Right. And no, but if you're not in this world, how would you know that?
Absolutely. No way.
Right. Or what is a PhD? I remember one of my aunts being like, "Are you still in school?" So, well, because otherwise, or how long is this going to take? Well, I don't know. It depends how long the study takes, right? So these kinds of, it's a very weird system.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Oh gosh, I don't know. This has been a really good therapy session. I appreciate it.
It's part of the service I provide.
Good. Have you talked to anyone about the labels that are often used? Because that's one of the things that I find is I don't know if it's under discussed. I mean, I think it's more important to, what I talked about with being human with people and having good relationships with people is the most important thing. But there are other things too that I think that we don't look at often enough. And I find particularly as soon as it gets institutionalized, right? So CIHR, when they started the strategy for patient-oriented research, they started putting in place their frameworks and their terms and all that sort of stuff, which is fine. You have to do that.
Sure.
Well, what it means is that, we use the term, I use the term all the time, patient partner. I don't love this term.
Yeah.
Right. And I think particularly for me as a person living with a chronic disease, that the term patient is actually a bit of a contested term. And it carries a lot of baggage that is not always appropriate and not always desired and not always true.
Yeah, I mean, we primarily call ourselves the patient engagement platform. I mean, the word platform is a whole other discussion, but
Yeah.
the
Yep.
patient engagement part is just because of the patient engagement framework from CIHR
Yeah.
existing.
Yeah. And that's what they call it. But I will always remember, and this is actually in that paper that I talked about, the 12 lessons learned. One of the patient partners in that project said, the engagement's over, we're partners now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, that concept of engagement is also, I don't love that term either. But I mean, you have to come up with words to clothe the ideas and the
Yeah.
concepts.
So what do they call it in
But
the
some of
UK? PPI, patient and public involvement.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's always framed as this thing where you hold the power and
Mm-hmm.
are allowing
Yeah.
people
Like,
to be
we are
involved,
engaging
or you're
patients.
engaging them,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, to a certain extent, that's just because that's how it's set up, right? Funds are awarded to institutions, and then the people who have authority over those funds are the researchers, right? So it's just like the structure within which all this work happens imposes certain power dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
but the language also entrenches some of those power dynamics, and I do not love that.
Yeah, no, like we're involved in the sport phase 2 application, so we're trying to see if we can sneak in some different language.
Yeah. I don't
Into
know. I
that.
mean, but I've had this discussion with other people too, where you can change the words, you can, but if you don't change the attitude, then
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter, right? It's sort of like, compliance and adherence.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very big in diabetes research in particular. And as a person living with diabetes, I don't like either of those words,
Yeah.
because both of them are coming from the same place, where it's we know what's best for you, and you should. I mean, it's the same thing with empowerment. Like, we hold the power and we're going to give it to you. We might take it
Mm-hmm.
back,
Yeah.
right? Like, we're going to empower you. I love all the research where, it's basically, we're going to empower people to do what
Mm-hmm.
we think they should do.
Yeah. It's not really empowerment. It's just
No,
as
no,
yeah,
no.
no, it's why I like to ask whenever anyone has any social science interest, even on the podcast.
Yeah.
I always ask them about just my favorite question of, can we learn anything from the social sciences? Because I'm
Oh,
what of my
yeah.
I mean, obviously I think the answer is yes, but one of the things I'm trying to, well, once we can all return to the public realm, organize is kind of a meeting between all the social science people that I know on main campus at U of C and the health people, who apparently just, because they're basically two different campuses, like they're not,
Yeah.
they're relatively close to one another, but they're not integrated at all.
No.
So I think just kind of saying, hey, all of this new stuff about patient engagement and patient-oriented research is great, and like I love it, but it's not new.
No, it is not new for sure.
Yeah, but one day.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, though, I mean, one of the fundamental tensions there is that so all the health sciences are problem-solving disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
whereas social sciences are primarily problematizing disciplines,
Yeah.
right? And so that causes a lot of tension.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Right? Like, we can bring up, I'm comfortable talking about, here are my issues with these words, but ultimately you have to call things something.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you need some shared language, and you need to sort of be like, okay, there's no perfect word. Here's the word we're going to use. Right? And so, and then when people continue to problematize the word, to a certain extent, that's not fair, because it's not that you don't know that there are any problems with that word. It's just that you need some language to be able to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, one of the reasons I want to have this sort of big, I don't know if meeting is the right word, even just make people have coffee with each other, is just so they can kind of have those two worlds interact. At the very least, I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. My doctoral fellowship was in a program called Healthcare Technology in Place.
Okay.
We had people like me from engineering. We had people in computer science. We had surgeons. We had, a whole bunch of sort of people from the more physical sciences, that sort of thing, and then people in English literature and sociology and social work and all that sort of stuff. And the regrouping. The reason for coming together was that everyone had an interest in health.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was funded through when CHR had the strategic training initiatives in health research was, I think, the term. And they were specifically looking for interdisciplinary initiatives. And so this was a very interdisciplinary program.
So thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Pep Talks, the Patient Engagement Podcast, brought to you by the Alberta Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research Patient Engagement Team. Special thanks to Paul Ferry, Sadia Ahmed, and Sandra Zielinski, and our summer students Sarah, Sydney, and Stella for their co-production. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you found it, and we hope you'll join us again for more interesting discussions about patient engagement in health research and healthcare.